The documentaries, fictional stories, and poems on this channel contain mature themes including psychological horror, violence, death, self-harm, mental health crises, and other disturbing subject matter. If you're sensitive to dark content, this may not be for you. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome, my forgotten ones. I am the Howlerist. Tonight I want to share with you the story of a beautiful movie star, of lost love, and of betrayal from those who are supposed to be the ones who protect you. If you like my original dark content, why not join the pack? This tale begins with a memory, born from a piece of music that most have never heard. Melancholy Belle. Chapter 1. Connection. The light filtered through the tall windows of Pinehaven Psychiatric Facility, catching particles of dust that drifted like ash through the common room. Diane Walsh shuffled through her sheet music at the upright piano. Its keys yellowed with age, the wood scarred by decades of use. Thursday afternoons were hers, an hour of music for patients who barely registered her presence. She'd played here for 3 years now, long enough to know which melodies agitated Mr. Kowalski, long enough to recognize the rhythms of medication times, shift changes, the particular quality of institutional silence. Today, she chose something different. Her fingers found the opening chords of Melancholy Belle, that old standard, the one that had given her nightmares during the stage production she'd worked on a few years back. 8 shows a week, 6 months straight. She could still hear the orchestrations in her sleep, still see the lead actress twirling under the stage lights in that powder blue gown. The melody unfurled into the stale air, sweet and aching. Diane let her eyes drift across the room. The usual audience of vacant stares and trembling hands, bodies slumped in wheelchairs, minds lost somewhere beyond reach. Then she heard it. A voice, thin, wavering, but unmistakable, humming. Diane's hand stuttered on the keys. She turned her head slowly, following the sound to the far corner, where an elderly woman sat in a chair by the window. Diane had seen her before. On every occasion she'd visited, but never heard her make a sound. The woman was small, bird-boned, her white hair wispy as spider silk. Her pale blue eyes were unfocused, gazing at nothing, but her lips moved with the melody. Every note, every phrase. Diane kept playing, unable to look away. The woman's gnarled fingers clutched at something, turning it slowly, mechanically. It was a large stone ring, and the afternoon light caught it. A glint of gold and diamonds, and a flash of a large dark stone. The song ended. The humming stopped, and silence reclaimed the room. Diane sat frozen at the piano, her pulse thrumming in her throat. She has purposely made herself aware of all the patients' names, their room numbers, their diagnosis, and their family status. One thing Diane was consciously aware of. If a resident did make a connection, there had to be a reason. And this resident had never reacted before, let alone hummed along in perfect pitch. The patient's name was Mavis Brown. She was a long-time resident who resided in room 347. Originally admitted in the early 60s, she was nonverbal, with no remaining family. Diane looked at the woman with a caring smile, but sadly she had retreated again into stillness, her fingers still gently manipulating the ring. Trying not to let this create pause to her performance for the other residents, Diane decided that the best plan of action was to perhaps perform another piece of music from the same production. As she began to play, Mavis's reaction was immediate. She began to hum along, still staring blankly but holding the complicated melody in perfect pitch and time with Diane's performance. A definitive outcome, and the entertainer knew it. This unassuming woman was deeply connected somehow to this show and musical score. The songs Diane had performed were originally from a movie from the 1960s called Melancholy Belle. The first song that Mavis had reacted to was the movie's main theme song, but the second more complex piece was the female lead's love ballad, and it became the major hit from the show. But what was puzzling about this 90-year-old lady knowing this show's music so well was that she had been admitted only months after its release and had been nonverbal ever since. All that Diane knew was that she had somehow finally made a connection with Mavis, and it was now her mission to understand why. Diane was heavily distracted throughout the afternoon. Even though she was trying her utmost to focus on making connections through music with residents at another facility, she was unable to get her mind off Mavis Brown. Her frail but beautiful voice, and the unusually large ring that adorned her wedding finger. There had been no mention of any husband in her past, so where did this ring come from? One thing was certain. Diane couldn't wait to knock off for the day and begin researching more about this old movie, Melancholy Belle. Chapter 2. Down the Rabbit Hole. Diane's apartment was small, cluttered with the debris of a life spent in theater. Playbills stacked on shelves, costume sketches pinned to corkboards, sheet music spilling from cardboard boxes. She dropped her bag by the door and went straight to the bookshelf, her hands moving with purpose. The DVD case was wedged between a biography of Judy Garland and a worn copy of Sondheim lyrics. Melancholy Belle, the original film. The cover showed a woman in a powder blue gown, her dark hair swept up, her smile radiant. Stella May, America's sweetheart, dead at 27. Diane pulled it out, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't watched it in a couple of years, not since before beginning work on her stage production. But she didn't need to watch it now. She needed to see it. She flipped the case over, studying the back. Production stills, promotional shots. And there was a close-up of Stella May's hand resting on a coffee cup, the kind of staged moment meant to look candid. On her ring finger, a gold band set with diamonds and a large, dark stone. Unmistakable. Diane's breath caught. She set the DVD down and pulled out the rehearsal binder from the production she'd worked on. 2 years of her life condensed into plastic sleeves and sticky notes, programs, publicity photos, research materials she'd collected to understand the film, the era, the music. There, a glossy 8x10 of Stella May on set, laughing at something off camera. Her hand was raised, fingers splayed, and the ring caught the light. The same ring. The exact same ring. Diane sank onto the couch, the photo in her lap. Her mind replayed the afternoon. the elderly woman in the corner, humming along in perfect pitch, her gnarled fingers turning that ring over and over, like a prayer. She grabbed her laptop. The search was easy. Stella May, actress, 1960s. The results flooded in. Wikipedia entries, fan sites, tribute pages. Diane skimmed, her eyes catching on familiar details. Born Estelle Mae Brown, 1935. Starred in a string of musicals and romantic comedies in the late 50s. Melancholy Belle was not only her biggest hit, but also her final role. Stella had passed away suddenly in 1962. Cause of death listed as heart failure. No surviving family. Diane frowned. No surviving family? She refined the search. Estelle Mae Brown, family. A genealogy site popped up. One of those user-contributed trees. She clicked, and there it was. Estelle Mae Brown, born January 8, 1935, Little Rock, Arkansas. Parents, Archie Brown and Elizabeth Brown. Twin sister, Mavis Ann Brown, stillborn. Diane stared at the screen. Mavis Ann Brown, the woman in room 347. Her pulse quickened. She opened another tab, typed faster now. Mavis Ann Brown, 1935. A few scattered records, a birth and a death certificate. Born January 8th, 1935. Died January 8th, 1935. Stillborn. Diane's hands hovered over the keyboard. Mavis Ann Brown died at birth. She never lived, never grew up, never aged. So who was the 90-year-old woman in Pine Haven, admitted in the early 1960s, listed as nonverbal with no family, wearing Stella Mae's ring? The air in the apartment felt too thin. Diane clicked back to the images of Stella Mae. That radiant smile, that dark hair. Died, she'd read somewhere. Naturally blonde. The ring on her finger in every shot. The voice, bright and clear, singing Melancholy Belle in the film's most iconic scene. And then, that thin, wavering hum from This Afternoon. The same melody, the same phrasing. 60 years later, from the throat of a woman who supposedly never existed. Diane sat back, her mind racing. What if Stella Mae didn't die? The thought was absurd. But the ring, that ring was real. The humming was real. The timeline fit. Stella Mae died in 1962. Patient Mavis Brown admitted to Pine Haven in the early 60s. Non-verbal ever since. What if they hid her? The pieces shifted, rearranging themselves into something that almost made sense. A beloved star struck down by illness, mental maybe. Something that robbed her of speech, of coherence. The people around her desperate to protect her legacy, her image. They couldn't let the world see Stella Mae like that. Broken, lost. So they did the only thing they could. They erased her. Gave her a new name. Her sister's name. The twin who never lived. Tucked her away somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. Let the world mourn the star while the woman lived on in silence. It was tragic, but it was also merciful, wasn't it? A way to let her rest, away from cameras and questions and the relentless glare of fame. Diane closed the laptop. She thought of the woman in the corner, humming softly, her fingers turning that ring. Thought of the blank stare, the decades of silence. Who were you, she wondered, and who loved you enough? to hide you away. Chapter 3, 1943. Happy but lonely. The yard smelled of honeysuckle and sun-baked earth. Estelle May Brown sat cross-legged in the patchy grass, humming a tune her father had taught her. Something about a mockingbird and a lonesome road. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with hair the color of wheat that fell in tangles down her back. Her mother said she had her father's voice, clear and sweet as water from a well. Liza Brown moved along the clothesline, pinning sheets with practiced efficiency. The fabric snapped in the breeze, white and clean against the blue Arkansas sky. It was June 1943, and the world beyond Little Rock was at war. But here in the backyard, there was only the rhythm of work and the sound of her daughter's voice. Estelle didn't notice the postman until he was at the gate, his uniform dark against the sunlight. He called out, his voice careful, and Liza turned. The telegram was small, a scrap of yellow paper that changed everything. Estelle watched her mother read it, watched her face go still, then crumple, the way a house collapses inward when the beams give out. The telegram slipped from Liza's fingers and drifted to the ground. "Mama?" Liza sank onto the porch steps, her hands covering her face. The sound that came from her was raw, animal. Estelle scrambled to her feet and ran to her mother, wrapping her thin arms around Liza's shaking shoulders. "Don't cry, Mama. Please don't cry." But Liza couldn't stop, and Estelle, 8 years old and small, didn't understand death yet. Not really. But she understood that something terrible had happened. That her father, who smelled like pipe tobacco and hummed while he worked, was never coming home. That night, Estelle lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, except for the sound of her mother crying in the next room, soft, muffled sobs that went on and on. Estelle turned onto her side, her hand reaching out to the empty space beside her. "Mavis," she whispered into the darkness. She'd been talking to her sister for as long as she could remember. Mama had told her once, when she was very small, that she'd had a twin. A sister who'd been born sleeping, who'd never gotten to open her eyes or take a breath. Mavis Ann. Estelle didn't remember her, of course, but somehow she'd always felt her there. A presence. A shadow sister who listened when no one else would. "Daddy's gone," Estelle whispered. "He's not coming back, and Mama won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do." The room stayed silent, but Estelle closed her eyes and imagined Mavis there beside her, small and warm, holding her hand the way a sister should. "I wish you were here," she said. "Mama needs us both." She fell asleep like that, her hand curled around empty air, humming one of her father's songs so softly it was almost soundless. The months that followed were gray. Liza took in laundry. She mended clothes for neighbors, scrubbed floors, did whatever work she could find, but it was never enough. The rent came due. The pantry grew bare. Estelle learned to eat less, to stay quiet, to make herself small, so her mother wouldn't have to worry about one more thing. By the spring of 1944, Liza was gaunt, her hands raw and red from lye soap. She took a job at Harper's Coffee House on Main Street. Long hours for low pay, but it was steady. She worked the morning shift, serving coffee and eggs to men in suits. Men who didn't look at her, except to ask for more cream. One of them was Thomas Palmer, He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordered the same thing: black coffee, toast, no butter. He was older than Liza by 15 years, maybe more. Neat, composed, with silver threading his dark hair and a watch that gleamed on his wrist. He wore tailored suits and left generous tips. After a few weeks, he started asking questions. How long had she worked there? Did she have family? When she mentioned her daughter, his expression softened, or seemed to. "A widow," he said quietly. "That's a hard road." Liza nodded, refilling his cup. She didn't tell him about the eviction notice tucked in her apron pocket, or the fact that Estelle had outgrown her shoes months ago. Thomas Palmer was not handsome. He was not charming, but he was there, and he was solid. And when he asked her to dinner one evening after her shift, she said yes. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. They married in late November 1944 in a courthouse ceremony with no flowers and no music. Estelle, 9 years old now and thin as a rail, stood beside her mother in a dress that was too small. Thomas Palmer signed the papers with a fountain pen and shook the judge's hand. Liza became Mrs. Palmer. Estelle kept her father's name, Brown, but it didn't matter. Within 2 weeks, Thomas had sold what little furniture they owned and bought 3 train tickets to New York City. "The girl needs proper training," he told Liza, who looked stunned. "Little Rock has nothing to offer her. We're going where opportunity is." Estelle, 9 years old and bewildered, watched Arkansas disappear through the train window, the flat fields giving way to cities she didn't know the names of. Her mother sat beside her, silent and pale. Thomas sat across from them, reading a newspaper, his expression unreadable. By the time they arrived in New York, winter had set in. Thomas moved them into a narrow apartment in Hell's Kitchen. 2 bedrooms, no parlor, but close to the dance studios and theaters, close to everything he needed. That night, after the boxes were unpacked and Liza had gone to bed exhausted, Thomas sat in the living room and listened. Through the thin walls, he could hear Estelle in her room, humming softly to herself. The same tune she'd been singing that afternoon at the coffee house, months ago, when Liza had brought her to work, because there was no one to watch her. The girl had sat in the corner booth, swinging her legs, singing to herself while her mother worked. Thomas had heard her then. That voice, clear, pure, untrained but perfect, singing her father's song. That was the day he'd started talking to Liza. Thomas Palmer leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. The girl had a voice, and Thomas Palmer had plans. Chapter 4. Lessons. Thomas wasted no time. Monday through Saturday, 7 in the morning until dark, dance at Miss Kovach's studio on 9th Avenue. Ballet, tap, modern, whatever Thomas decided she needed. Voice lessons with a stern Italian woman who rapped Estelle's knuckles when she slouched. Elocution with a former stage actress who made her repeat vowels until her throat ached, smoothing away the soft southern drawl that marked her as country, as less. Again, the woman would say, her mouth pinched. "It's dance, not dance. Can't, not can't. You sound like a hick child. No one will take you seriously sounding like that." Estelle was 10 years old. Thomas watched every lesson, sat in the back of studios with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on her, If she stumbled, if her pitch wavered, if she forgot a step, she saw it in his face. The tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his knee. She learned to read him like weather, to brace for the storm. At home, he was worse. "You embarrassed me today," he'd say, his voice low and cold. "Do you think I'm spending money on you so you can fumble around like some backwoods fool?" Estelle would stand in the narrow kitchen, her hands trembling, while he towered over her. Liza hovered in the doorway, saying nothing. "You'll do better tomorrow," Thomas would say, "or there won't be a tomorrow." She didn't know what that meant, but the threat sat heavy in her chest. When she was 12, Thomas took her to a salon and had her hair dyed. "Blonde is common," he said, standing behind her as the stylist worked. "Dark hair photographs better, more striking." Estelle watched in the mirror as the color bled away, her father's wheat gold replaced with something deep and foreign. She looked like someone else, someone older, someone who wasn't her. "There," Thomas said, satisfied. "Much better." Liza said nothing. By 1948, Estelle was performing. Small venues at first. Talent shows, church fundraisers, social clubs where Thomas could network and collect business cards. She sang standards, show tunes, whatever Thomas told her to sing. Her voice had matured, grown richer, and people noticed. They clapped. They told Thomas he had a real talent on his hands. "Not just talent," Thomas would say, shaking hands, smiling his thin smile. "Discipline. That's what separates the amateurs from the professionals." Estelle stood beside him in dresses Thomas picked out, her hair pinned back, her smile fixed. She'd learned to hold it even when her feet ached, even when exhaustion pulled at her bones. She was 13. One night, after a particularly brutal rehearsal, Estelle broke. Thomas had made her repeat the same song for 2 hours, stopping her every few bars to criticize her phrasing, her breath control, the way she held her hands. When she finally cracked, her voice splintering mid-note, he slammed his hand on the piano. "Again." "I can't," Estelle whispered, tears streaking her face. "I'm tired, Thomas. Please." "Again." "No." The word hung in the air. Thomas stood slowly, his face dark. "What did you say?" Estelle's hands shook, but something in her, some stubborn spark of her father, flared. "I said no. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to be normal. I want to go to school like other kids. I want—" The slap came fast, sharp, across her cheek. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her face. "Thomas!" Liza's voice from the doorway. But Thomas didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Estelle, cold and flat. "You'll do what I tell you. You understand me? Everything you have is because of me. Everything." He walked out. Estelle stood frozen, her cheek burning, her chest heaving. She wanted to run, she wanted to scream, but her legs wouldn't move. Liza crossed the room slowly. She knelt in front of Estelle, her hands gentle on her daughter's shoulders. "Come here, sweetheart." Estelle collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. Liza held her, smoothing her dark hair. And then, softly, she said, "Look around, Estelle. Look at what we have now. A real home. Food on the table every night. You have opportunities I never dreamed of when I was your age." Estelle pulled back, her face wet. "But Mama, do you want to go back to Little Rock?" Liza's voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, something hard. "To that little house with the leaking roof, eating scraps, wondering how we'd survive." "No, but..." "Then you have to behave, Estelle. You have to do what Thomas says. Because if you don't, we'll lose all of this. Do you understand?" Estelle stared at her mother, at the woman who used to sing with her in the yard, who used to hold her when she cried after her father died. "Do you understand?" Liza repeated. Estelle nodded, and something inside her, something small and bright, went out. That night, after the apartment fell silent, Estelle sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They ached from piano drills. Her throat was raw from singing. Her cheek still stung where Thomas had slapped her. She was 13 years old, and she was so tired. "Mavis," she spoke to the empty room, her voice barely a whisper. She'd been talking to her sister for years now, every night when the lights went out and she was alone. It was the only time she felt safe enough to be honest. "I tried to tell him no today. I tried to fight back." Her voice cracked. "But Mama said I have to behave, that we'll lose everything if I don't." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore." She closed her eyes. "Sometimes I wish I'd been the one who didn't make it, that you'd been the one to live instead." The room stayed quiet, but Estelle imagined Mavis there, sitting beside her, pale and gentle. The sister who never had to grow up, never had to hurt. She began to hum, soft and low, one of their father's songs. The melody filled the small room, and for a moment, Estelle felt less alone. In the hall, Thomas stood outside her door, listening. He'd heard her talking to herself before, muttering to some imaginary companion. It was strange, certainly, childish, but harmless enough. By 1950, when Estelle was 15, the transformation was complete. Her Arkansas accent was gone. Her hair was glossy and dark. She moved like a dancer, spoke like a trained actress, sang like someone twice her age. Thomas had begun calling her by a new name in public, Stella May, a stage name that rolled off the tongue, sweet and marketable. She performed at supper clubs now, small theaters, anywhere Thomas could book her. People whispered that she was the next big thing, that she'd be on Broadway within a year. Stella, stood on stage and sang, her voice clear and aching, while the audience applauded. And in the back of the room, Thomas Palmer sat with his arms crossed, watching, planning. Chapter 5. The Role of a Lifetime. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Thomas Palmer sat at the small desk in the apartment's front room, his coffee cooling beside him. When the phone rang, he picked it up on the second ring. "Palmer?" "Mr. Palmer, this is Roman Wilesmith. I'm directing a picture for Crestwood Pictures called Melancholy Belle. I'd like to discuss your client." Thomas straightened, his pulse quickening. Roman Wilesmith, one of the biggest directors in Hollywood. Thomas kept his voice steady. "I'm listening. I'd like to meet. Today, if possible. My office, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Wilesmith's office overlooked Sunset Boulevard. All polished wood and leather chairs. The director himself was in his 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that came from 20 years of making stars. He gestured for Thomas to sit. "I've been watching Miss May's career for some time now," Wilesmith said, lighting a cigarette. "Saw her on Broadway 2 years ago. Remarkable voice. But I thought she was too young, too soft. Not right for Belle." Thomas said nothing, waiting. "Then I saw A Time to Die." Wilesmith exhaled smoke, his eyes sharp. "She's matured. There's depth there now, complexity. She can carry Melancholy Belle. I want her for the lead." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "She'd be honored." "I'm sure." Wilesmith tapped ash into a tray. "But let's talk terms. Your cut, Mr. Palmer. I assume you'll want the standard 15%. Thomas smiled, thin and cold. "Mr. Wilesmith, I've invested 15 years into Stella's career. Training, coaching, opportunities, thousands of dollars, countless hours. She is what she is because of my work. I require 50% of her compensation, plus a producer credit on the film." Wilesmith's eyebrows lifted. 50%. That's highly unusual. So is Stella. A long pause. Wilesmith studied him, then stubbed out his cigarette. "Done, but she better be worth it." "Oh," Thomas said, standing. "She will be." That evening, Thomas told Stella over dinner. "You got it," he said, watching her across the table. Liza sat silent beside him, picking at her food. "Lead role, Melancholy Belle, Crestwood Studios. Wilesmith wants you." Stella's fork clattered to her plate. Really? "Filming starts in 2 months. This is it, Stella. This is the one that makes you a legend." Her face lit up, genuine joy breaking through the careful mask she'd learned to wear. For a moment, she looked like the girl she'd been before Thomas, before New York. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Thomas." He nodded, sipping his wine. 50%, producer credit. Everything he'd worked for, finally paying off. Stella didn't ask about the contract. She never did. Production began in May. The soundstage at Crestwood was massive, bustling with crew and equipment. Stella arrived early every morning, script in hand. Thomas always a few steps behind. He watched rehearsals from the edge of the set, arms crossed, his presence a constant weight. Lawrence Bradley, the male lead, noticed her immediately. He was 42, handsome in the effortless way of men who'd always gotten what they wanted. Charming, witty, with a reputation for affairs that burned hot and faded fast. He'd played opposite a dozen leading ladies, romanced half of them off screen. He tried with Stella. Flowers appeared in her dressing room, compliments during breaks, an invitation to dinner that he delivered with his trademark grin. "What do you say, Miss May? Let me take you somewhere the food's better than craft services." Stella smiled politely, the way she'd been trained. "That's kind, Mr. Bradley, but I have early call times. I need my rest. Please, call me Lawrence, and I promise I'm excellent company." "I'm sure you are." But her eyes didn't linger. Her smile didn't waver into something warmer. She was professional, courteous, and utterly unreachable. Lawrence noticed Thomas watching from across the set, his gaze fixed on them, and he understood. Henry Miller was 26, lean and quiet, with carpenter's hands and sawdust in his hair. He'd been building sets for 3 years. Good, steady work that paid better than the factory jobs he'd grown up around. He kept his head down, did his job, didn't bother the actors. But he noticed Stella May. Everyone did. She was luminous on set, her voice filling the sound stage during musical numbers, her presence magnetic. But what struck Hank wasn't the performance. It was the moments between takes, when the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling. The way her shoulders sagged, the way her smile dropped the instant she thought no one was looking. The way the man in the corner, her manager, someone said, watched her like a hawk. One afternoon, Hank was repairing a section of the cafe set when Stella walked past, script in hand. She stumbled slightly on a loose board, caught herself, then crouched to examine it. "Sorry," Hank said quickly, setting down his hammer. "I'll fix that." She looked up at him, startled. For a moment, their eyes met. Hank had seen her in close-up on film, had watched her perform for weeks. But this was different. Up close, without makeup and stage lights, she was younger than he'd expected, tired, real. "It's all right," she said softly. "I should have been watching where I was going. Still, don't want you getting hurt." She smiled, small but genuine. "Thank you." And then she was gone, swept back into rehearsal by an assistant director. But Hank stood there, hammer in hand, and felt something shift. Across the soundstage, Lawrence Bradley watched the exchange, watched the way Stella's expression had changed, just for a moment. The way the carpenter stared after her like he'd seen something precious. Lawrence leaned against a prop column, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he thought, "isn't that interesting?" Chapter 6. Connection. It started small. A coffee cup left on the edge of the set where Stella would see it during her break. A board replaced before she arrived in the morning, so she wouldn't trip again. Hank didn't announce himself, didn't make a show of it. He just paid attention. And Stella noticed. She started lingering near the cafe set between takes, flipping through her script while Hank worked. Sometimes she asked questions about the construction, the wood, how long it took to build something from nothing. He answered quietly, his hands steady on hammer and nails. And when she spoke, he listened intently, like her words mattered. It was the listening that undid her. No one had listened to Stella in years. Thomas talked at her. Orders, corrections, critiques. Liza echoed him, her voice soft but unyielding. The directors and producers saw her as a product, a voice, a face to light and frame. But Hank looked at her like she was a person. One afternoon, during a long lighting adjustment, Stella sat on the edge of a false windowsill while Hank sanded down a section of trim nearby. The soundstage hummed with activity, crew shouting, equipment clattering, but in their corner it was quiet. "Do you like it?" he asked suddenly, as he glanced up. "Building?" Stella questioned. "Performing, being here, all of it." She looked down at her hands. The script balanced on her knees. Her nails were painted pale pink, her hair pinned in perfect victory rolls. She looked like a movie star, but her voice was small. "Sometimes," she said, "and sometimes I feel like I'm drowning." Hank set down the sandpaper. "You don't have to do it, you know, if it makes you miserable." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You don't understand. I don't get to choose." "Everyone gets to choose." "Not me." The weight in those two words made Hank's chest ache. He wanted to ask more, to understand. But footsteps echoed across the set. Thomas Palmer, moving toward them with deliberate calm. Stella straightened immediately, her expression smoothing into something blank and obedient. The transformation was so fast, it startled Hank. "Miss May," Thomas said, his tone pleasant but cold. "They're ready for you." "Of course." She stood, script clutched to her chest, and walked away without looking back. Thomas lingered, his eyes on Hank. "The sets look fine," Thomas said. "Keep up the work." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. But the connection had been made, and it grew roots. Stella found reasons to be near him. Hank found excuses to work late, to be there when she finished for the day. They talked in stolen moments, about her childhood in Arkansas, his in Ohio, about music, about her father, about the way Little Rock smelled after rain. She told him things she hadn't told anyone, that she missed her real name, that she used to have blonde hair, that sometimes she dreamed about running, but when she woke up, she couldn't remember where she'd been trying to go. And Hank told her she didn't have to run alone. One evening, after everyone else had left, they stood together on the empty soundstage. The lights were dim, the false cafe glowing softly under a single work lamp. Stella leaned against the counter, exhausted, and Hank handed her a cup of water. "Thank you," she whispered. "For water? For seeing me?" Hank's throat tightened. He wanted to say 100 things, that she was extraordinary, that she deserved better, that he'd burn the whole studio down if it meant she could be free. But all he managed was, "I do see you, Estelle." She looked up sharply. "How do you know that name?" "I asked around, found out who you were before all this." Her eyes filled with tears. "No one's called me that in 15 years. Then they're all fools." Stella looked down at the water in her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I talk to my sister sometimes," she said quietly. Hank tilted his head. "I didn't know you had a sister." "I don't. Not really." She set the cup down. "She died when we were born. Mavis, my twin. She was stillborn. I'm so sorry. I've talked to her since I was little. I know it sounds crazy, but..." She laughed, a small, broken sound. "It's like she's there, listening. The only person who never asks anything of me." Hank reached out, his hand covering hers. "It's not crazy. It's beautiful." Stella looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't think I'm strange? I think you've been alone for a long time, and you found a way to survive it." She kissed him then. It was quick, desperate, her hands clutching his shirt. When she pulled back, her face was flushed, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Hank's hand found hers, their fingers lacing. Don't ever apologize for that. Lawrence Bradley saw it all. He'd been watching for weeks, the way Stella's face changed when Hank was near, the way the carpenter looked at her like she hung the moon. Lawrence had tried to be that man once, years ago, with someone else. He'd failed spectacularly, left wreckage in his wake. He recognized real love when he saw it, and he recognized that he had no place in it. One evening, as the crew packed up, Lawrence found Hank coiling cables near the back of the soundstage. "Miller, got a minute?" Hank looked up, wary. "Sure." Lawrence pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, offered one. Hank shook his head. "Suit yourself." Lawrence lit up, exhaled slowly. "I need to tell you something about Stella and Thomas Palmer." Hank's jaw tightened. "What about him? Do you know what he's taking from her?" "What do you mean?" 50%. Lawrence's voice was flat. "Of every dollar she earns, plus a producer credit. He negotiated it into her contract for this film. She doesn't even know." Hank stared at him. 50%. And it's not just the money. He controls everything. Where she goes, who she talks to, what she eats. I've seen managers before, but Palmer... Lawrence shook his head. "He's something else. She's not his client. She's his prisoner." Hank's hands curled into fists. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see the way she looks at you, and I see the way you look at her. I thought about pursuing her myself, but I'm a selfish bastard, Miller. I'd ruin her. You, though," he studied Hank, "you might actually save her." Lawrence reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. He handed it to Hank. "What is this?" "The ring from the film. The engagement ring Belle receives in the final scene. We finished shooting with it yesterday. Production won't miss it." Lawrence's smile was sad. "I was going to keep it. Souvenir. But you should have it." Hank opened the box. The ring gleamed. Gold band, diamonds, a dark sapphire at the center. "Propose to her," Lawrence said quietly. "Get her away from Palmer before it's too late." Hank closed the box, his throat tight. "He'll come after us." "Probably. But you're a carpenter, Miller. You know how to build things." Lawrence dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his heel. "Build her a life, one where she's free." He walked away, leaving Hank standing alone in the dim soundstage, the ring heavy in his hand. Chapter 7. Hope. Hank waited until the soundstage was empty. It was late, past midnight, and the crew had long since gone home. But Stella had stayed, running lines in her dressing room, and Hank had found an excuse to linger. He always did. When she finally emerged, tired and still in costume, she found him sitting on the cafe set, the work lamp casting long shadows across the false floorboards. "You're still here," she said, surprised. "Needed to talk to you." Something in his voice made her stop. She crossed to him slowly. "What's wrong?" Hank stood. His hands were shaking. He'd rehearsed this a dozen times in his head. But now that she was here, now that her eyes were on him, worried and searching, Every word evaporated. So he just pulled the box from his pocket and opened it. The ring gleamed under the lamp. Diamonds and sapphire. The same ring she'd worn in 100 takes. The symbol of Belle's happy ending. Stella's breath caught. "I know this is crazy," Hank said, his voice rough. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know your life is complicated and mine is simple, and we're from different worlds. But Estelle," her eyes welled at the sound of her real name. "I love you, not Stella May. You. The girl who hums her father's songs when she thinks no one's listening. The beautiful, crazy girl who still talks to her dead sister. The girl who's scared and strong, and so damn tired of pretending." He took her hand. "Run away with me. When filming wraps, we'll go somewhere Thomas can't find us. Somewhere you can just be Estelle again." A tear slipped down her cheek. "He'll come after us. Let him try." "Hank, marry me," he said. "Please." She stared at him, at this man who'd seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one had since her father died, who offered her freedom like it was something she deserved. "Yes," the word broke from her like a sob. "Yes. Yes, God, yes." Hank slid the ring onto her finger and she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his neck. He held her while she cried. Great, shaking sobs that felt like years of grief pouring out. "We're going to be okay," he whispered into her hair. "I promise. We're going to be okay." They made plans, in whispers. Filming would wrap in 3 weeks. Hank had savings, not much, but enough to get them out of New York, maybe to California or up to Maine. Somewhere small, somewhere quiet. Stella would leave everything behind. The contracts, the apartment, Thomas. She didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, she wanted something more than she feared the consequences. She couldn't wear the ring on set. Thomas would notice immediately. So she kept it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her costume. But every so often, during breaks, she'd slip into her dressing room and look at it. Proof that Hank was real, that the future was real. She glowed. The makeup artists commented on it. The director praised her performance, said she'd found something deeper in Belle's joy, something authentic. Even Lawrence noticed, catching her eye during a scene and giving her a small, knowing smile. Thomas noticed too. He watched her more closely, his eyes sharp, asked questions. Where had she been during lunch? Why was she humming? Who had she been talking to? No one, Stella lied, her voice steady. Just running lines. But Thomas didn't believe her. 3 days before filming wrapped, Hank kissed her goodnight outside the stage door. It was risky, too exposed, too many chances someone might see. But Stella didn't care. She pulled him close, her fingers tangling in his hair, and kissed him like she was drowning, and he was air. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. 3 more days." 3 more days, he echoed. "And then we're gone." She smiled, radiant, unguarded, and slipped back inside. Hank watched her go, his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to hope. He didn't see the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Didn't see Thomas Palmer's face, pale and cold in the streetlight. That night, Stella went to Hank's small apartment in Brooklyn. It was the first time she'd been there. A tiny place, one room with a kitchenette and a bed shoved against the wall. It smelled like wood shavings and coffee, and it was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. "It's not much," Hank said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect." They didn't talk much after that. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and they fell into each other with the desperation of people who'd been starving. Her dress ended up on the floor. His shirt followed. They made love slowly, carefully, like they were memorizing each other. Afterward, Stella lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "3 more days," she whispered. 3 more days. She fell asleep there, safe and whole, the ring on her finger catching the moonlight through the window. The next morning, Hank didn't show up to set. Stella waited, anxious, scanning the crew. Maybe he was late, maybe he'd overslept. But by lunch, his workstation was still empty, his tools untouched. She asked the set coordinator, "Where's Hank? Henry Miller?" The man shrugged. Didn't show, didn't call either, probably quit. Quit? Happens. A guy gets a better offer, doesn't bother saying goodbye. That's not. He wouldn't. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd realized what running with her would cost and decided it wasn't worth it? No, Hank wouldn't do that. He loved her. He'd proposed. She touched the ring beneath her blouse, trying to calm her racing heart. He'd be back tomorrow. There had to be an explanation. But tomorrow came, and Hank didn't. Stella tried calling his apartment. No answer. She went there after filming, knocked until her knuckles ached. The landlord told her Miller had moved out, paid through the end of the month, and left no forwarding address. "When?" Stella demanded. "Yesterday morning. Had some guy help him load up a truck." Her world tilted. "What guy?" Didn't catch a name. Older fellow, well-dressed. Stella's blood turned to ice. Thomas. She confronted him that night, trembling with rage and terror. "Where is he? What did you do?" Thomas looked up from his newspaper, his expression calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Henry Miller. Hank. Where is he?" "Oh, the carpenter?" Thomas folded the paper slowly. "I believe he quit. Took a job out west. Someone mentioned it in passing." "You're lying." "Am I?" Thomas stood, crossing to her. Or did he realize what running away with you would actually mean? A life of mediocrity. No fame, no money. Just a girl with a decent voice and no prospects. His voice dropped. "Maybe he decided you weren't worth the trouble." "No." Stella's voice broke. "He wouldn't." "Men leave, Stella. It's what they do." Thomas's eyes were cold. "Your father left, and now Miller's left. The sooner you accept that, the better." She wanted to scream, to hit him, to claw his eyes out. But she just stood there, shaking, as Thomas walked past her. "Filming wraps tomorrow," he said over his shoulder. "Get some rest. You look terrible." Stella didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the ring clutched in her fist. Hank had promised. He'd promised, but he was gone, and she was alone. Chapter 8. Empty. 4 weeks after Hank disappeared, Stella woke to nausea so violent she barely made it to the bathroom. She retched until her stomach was empty, then dry heaved over the toilet, her body shaking. When it finally subsided, she slumped against the cold tile, sweating and exhausted. A knock at the door. "Stella?" Liza's voice, worried. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she managed. "Just something I ate." But it wasn't something she ate. And when it happened again, the next morning, and the morning after that, she knew. Thomas heard her the third time. She emerged from the bathroom, pale and trembling, to find him standing in the hallway watching. He didn't say anything, just looked at her face, her body, his expression unreadable. Then he walked away. Stella's blood turned cold. She tried to tell herself she was imagining it, that Thomas couldn't possibly know just from seeing her sick. But she'd lived under his watch for 15 years. She knew how he read her, how he noticed everything, every hesitation, every change, every secret she tried to keep. She counted back, her hands shaking. 4 weeks since that night with Hank. 4 weeks since she'd felt his arms around her, heard him promise they'd be free. She touched her stomach, still flat, still unchanged. But something was there. Someone. For 2 days, she didn't tell anyone. She moved through rehearsals and fittings in a daze, her mind spinning. A baby. Hank's baby. Part of Hank. Still real. Still hers. The grief that had been crushing her shifted just slightly into something else. Not hope, exactly, but purpose. She had to protect this, had to keep it safe, even if Hank was gone, even if he'd left her, which she still couldn't quite believe. She had this piece of him, this second chance. She could run, take what little money she'd managed to hide from Thomas over the years, and disappear. Go somewhere he'd never find her. Raise the baby alone. I can do this, she thought. I have to. But Thomas knew. She didn't know how. Maybe it was the way she'd started eating saltines in the morning. Maybe it was the exhaustion she couldn't hide. Maybe he'd been watching closer than she realized. One evening, he knocked on her bedroom door. "We need to talk." Stella's stomach dropped. She opened the door slowly. Thomas stood in the hallway, his face unreadable. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. She tried to speak, to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Thomas stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "How far along?" "I don't." I said, "How far?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. He was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, his hands curling into fists. "This is what happens," he said, his voice low and controlled. "When you forget your place, when you think you can have a life outside of what I've built for you." Thomas, that carpenter. Thomas's eyes were cold. You thought he loved you. You thought he was going to save you. He stepped closer. "He took money, Stella. A lot of it. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere, far away from you." Stella's vision blurred. "You're lying." "Am I? Then where is he?" She had no answer, because Hank was gone. and she had no proof. No letter, no call, nothing to explain why he'd vanished. He used you, Thomas continued. Saw an opportunity and took it, and now you're left with this. He gestured at her stomach, his mouth twisting in disgust. Problem. It's not a problem. Her voice was small, desperate. It's a disaster. Thomas's tone turned sharp. You think you can have a baby? Be a mother? You can barely take care of yourself. And even if you could, what do you think this does to your career? To everything I've built? I don't care about the career. The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. She stumbled, her hand flying to her cheek. You will care, Thomas hissed, because without it, you're nothing. Without me, you're nothing. Stella's ears rang. She tasted blood. We're fixing this, Thomas said. Tomorrow. No. Yes. No. She straightened, her voice breaking. I won't. You can't make me. I can, and I will. He moved to the door, paused. Get some rest. We have an appointment at 9. As he left the room, she could hear the sound of the door being locked from the outside. Stella sank onto the bed, shaking. Her hand moved to her stomach. Protective. Desperate. I'm sorry, she thought. I'm so sorry. Liza came to her room an hour later. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at Stella. Thomas told me. Stella said nothing. What was there to say? You have to understand, Liza began, her voice soft. It's not what you think. He's trying to protect you. Protect me? Stella's laugh was bitter. He's trying to erase this, like it never happened. Because it can't happen, sweetheart. Liza finally looked at her, and her eyes were tired, pleading. You're not ready to be a mother. You're 25 years old. Your career is just beginning. I don't care about the career. The words ripped from Stella's throat. I don't care about any of it. I just want. She broke off, sobbing. Liza reached for her, but Stella jerked away. Don't touch me. Estelle. You let him do this. Stella's voice shook with fury. You let him control me, hurt me, take everything from me. And now you're going to let him take this too. I'm trying to keep us safe, to keep us from losing everything. We already lost everything, Stella screamed. We lost it the day you married him. Liza flinched like she'd been struck. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating. Then Liza stood, her movements slow and heavy. The appointment is at 9. I'll wake you at 8. She left, again locking the door behind her. Stella curled onto her side, her hand pressed to her stomach, and wept until there was nothing left. The clinic was quiet, sterile, tucked away in a part of the city where people paid for discretion. Thomas didn't come inside. He waited in the car, smoking, while Liza walked Stella through the door. A nurse took her information. A doctor, middle-aged, professional, detached, explained the procedure. Stella heard none of it. She sat on the examination table, staring at the wall, her mind blank. Miss Brown, the doctor's voice. We're ready. Liza stood by the door, her face pale, her hands twisting together. Stella looked at her. at the woman who'd held her after her father died, who'd sung her to sleep, who'd once promised to protect her. "Mama," Stella whispered, "please." Liza's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." The nurse guided Stella back, and the door closed. When it was over, Stella sat in the recovery room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at nothing. She felt empty, scraped clean, a hollow shell where a person used to be. Liza tried to take her hand. Stella pulled away. "Don't." They drove home in silence. Thomas didn't ask how she was, didn't speak at all. When they reached the apartment, Stella went straight to her room and locked the door. She pulled the ring from around her neck and held it in her palm. Hank was gone. The baby was gone. And she, Estelle, the girl from Little Rock who used to sing her father's songs, she was gone too. Only Stella May remained, and Stella May felt truly empty. Chapter 9. Gone. When Melancholy Belle premiered, the reviews were rapturous. Critics called it a triumph, a modern masterpiece. Stella May's performance was hailed as luminous, heartbreaking, a star-making turn. The film was projected to be one of the biggest hits of the year. Thomas had orchestrated a full promotional tour, radio interviews, magazine features, television appearances, premieres in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Stella May's face was everywhere, her voice on every station. But Stella herself was gone. She moved through the tour like a sleepwalker, smiled when told to smile, answered questions in a flat, hollow voice. Her eyes were vacant, her movements mechanical. The journalists noticed but wrote it off as exhaustion, nerves, the price of sudden fame. Thomas knew better. "You need to pull yourself together," he hissed during a car ride between interviews. "You're embarrassing me." "Embarrassing yourself." Stella stared out the window, saying nothing. "Did you hear me?" "Yes." "Then fix your face. We have 3 more stops today and you will smile. You will be charming. Do you understand?" "Yes." But when they arrived at the next interview, a popular morning radio show, Stella walked into the studio, sat in front of the microphone, and froze. The host prompted her with questions she didn't answer. Just sat there, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap. "Miss May?" The host tried again. "Are you all right?" Silence. Thomas stepped in, all charm and apology. "I'm so sorry. She's been unwell. Exhaustion from the tour. Perhaps we could reschedule." They left. Thomas's fury was silent and cold. It got worse. At a premiere in Chicago, Stella stood on the red carpet, flashbulbs popping, reporters shouting questions. She opened her mouth to answer and burst into tears. Not delicate, cinematic tears. Great, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas pulled her away, smiling tightly for the cameras. "She's overcome with emotion. It's been such a journey." But backstage, he grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I can't," Stella whispered. "I can't do this anymore." "You don't have a choice. I want to go home." "This is your life. There is no home. There's only this." She looked at him with empty eyes. then I don't want to live." Thomas let her go. He said nothing. But that night he made a phone call. The next morning, Liza came to Stella's hotel room. "Thomas thinks you need rest," she said gently. "Real rest, somewhere quiet." Stella was sitting on the bed, still in yesterday's clothes. She hadn't slept, hadn't moved. "There's a place," Liza continued. "A private facility for people who need time to recover." Stella's head lifted slowly. "You want to lock me up?" "No, sweetheart. We want to help you." "I don't need help. I need..." Her voice broke. "I need Hank. I need my baby. I need my life. Estelle." "Don't call me that." Stella's voice was flat. "Estelle is dead. You killed her." Thomas brought in a doctor 2 days later. Dr. Richard Gannon was in his 50s, well respected, with a private practice that catered to wealthy families with difficult problems that needed to be managed discreetly. He interviewed Stella in the hotel suite while Thomas and Liza sat nearby. "Miss May," Dr. Gannon said kindly, "your stepfather tells me you've been struggling." Stella said nothing. "He mentioned that you've been hearing things, seeing things that aren't there." "I don't hear things." Thomas leaned forward. "She talks to her dead sister. Has for years. Mavis, the twin who died at birth." Dr. Gannon made a note. "Is that true, Miss May?" Stella's hands clenched. "I talk to her sometimes. So what? She's my sister." "But she's not really there, is she?" "She's..." Stella's voice wavered. "She's always been there. She listens. She understands." "Do you hear her talking back?" "No. I talk to her. It helps." Dr. Gannon exchanged a glance with Thomas. "And recently, have you had thoughts of harming yourself?" Stella hesitated. "I said I didn't want to live. That's not the same thing." "It's close enough." Dr. Gannon closed his notebook. "Miss May, I believe you're experiencing a severe depressive episode, possibly with delusional features. You need treatment, proper care." "I'm not delusional." "You believe your dead sister is with you." "I don't believe she's alive. I just..." Stella looked at Liza, desperate. "Mama, please, tell him. Tell him I'm not crazy." Liza looked away. Thomas stood. "What do you recommend, doctor?" "Hospitalization, immediately. Somewhere she can be monitored, kept safe. And if the delusions persist..." He paused. "There are treatments, newer methods, very effective." Stella's blood ran cold. No, I'm not going anywhere." "You don't have a choice," Thomas said quietly. "I'm an adult. You can't. You're incapacitated, mentally unfit. I'm your legal guardian in matters of health. And I'm making the decision for you." Stella looked at her mother. "Mama, please." Liza's hands twisted in her lap. Tears streamed down her face. But she didn't speak. They took her that night. 2 orderlies arrived with Dr. Gannon. Stella fought, screaming, clawing, but they were stronger. They sedated her, and the world went soft and blurry. As they carried her out, she saw Thomas standing in the doorway, his face expressionless, and Liza weeping into her hands. The last thing Stella said before the drugs pulled her under was a whisper. "Mavis, help me." She woke in a white room with bars on the windows. Days passed, or was it weeks? Time had no meaning here in this place. Doctors came and went, asking her questions she refused to answer and talking over her like she wasn't there. Thomas visited once, spoke to them in low voices she couldn't quite hear. She heard the words procedure, permanent solution, and for her own good. Stella understood in some distant part of herself what they were planning. But she was too tired to fight anymore, too empty, too broken. When they came for her, when they wheeled her down the white hallway toward the operating room, she didn't scream, didn't resist. When they had strapped her to the table, the doctor leaned over her, his face kind but clinical. "This will help you," he said. "You won't be in pain anymore." The anesthesia mask came down, and as the darkness swallowed her, Stella whispered one last time to the sister who'd never lived. "Mavis, I'm coming." When she woke, Estelle Mae Brown, the girl who sang her father's songs, who fell in love with a carpenter, who carried hope for just a few brief, shining weeks, was gone. Only a shell remained. They called her Mavis now. Chapter 10. Revelation. It took Diane 3 weeks to get access to the file. She'd tried the official route first, requested records, cited family research, historical preservation. The facility's administration was polite but firm. Patient files were confidential, privacy laws, liability. Sorry. So Diane tried something else. She kept coming to Pine Haven every Thursday like clockwork, playing piano for the residents. And every Thursday she watched the staff, learned their names, their rhythms, noticed who lingered, who cared, who'd been there long enough to remember when things were different. Margaret Chen had worked at Pine Haven for 40 years. She was in her 60s now, soft-spoken, with tired eyes and gentle hands. Diane saw the way she spoke to the patients, not at them, but to them, like they were still people. One afternoon, after the music session ended, Diane caught Margaret in the hallway. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret paused, a stack of charts in her arms. "Of course." "The woman in room 347, Mavis Brown, how long has she been here?" Margaret's expression shifted, something sad flickering across her face. "Since before I started, early 60s, I think." "Why?" "I think," Diane hesitated, "I think she might be someone else, someone important." Margaret studied her. "You're the pianist, the one who plays the old songs." "Yes." "She hums along sometimes, I've noticed." "She knows them," Diane said. "Every note, every word, because I think she's the one who sang them first." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she glanced down the hallway, checking they were alone. "Follow me." The records room was small, cramped, lined with filing cabinets that smelled like dust and old paper. Margaret unlocked one, her fingers moving through tabs until she found the right file. She hesitated, then handed it to Diane. "10 minutes, Margaret said. "That's all I can give you. And if anyone asks, you were never here." "Thank you." Margaret left, closing the door softly behind her. Diane opened the file. Patient name, Mavis Ann Brown. Date of birth, January 8, 1935. Date of admission, March 15, 1962. Admitted by Thomas Palmer, stepfather/legal guardian. Diagnosis, severe depressive disorder, delusional features. Notes, patient exhibits persistent belief in presence of deceased twin sister, Estelle Mae Brown, stillborn 1935. Engages in one-sided conversations, singing. Also exhibits a persistent fixation on a man referred to as Hank, and a child she insists was taken from her. Both attributed to delusional disorder. Patient deemed danger to self. Voluntary commitment refused. Guardian authorization obtained. Procedure: prefrontal lobotomy performed April 3, 1962. Dr. Richard Gannon attending. Patient responded to sedation. Procedure successful. Post-operative prognosis: stable, nonverbal, requires long-term care. Family contact: Thomas Palmer, ceased visits 1963, deceased 1996. No other known family. Diane's hands shook. She read the line about Hank twice. If everything else in this file was a lie wrapped in clinical language, then that couldn't be delusion either. She flipped through the pages, saw the neat clinical notes documenting years of silence, decades of a woman sitting in a chair, staring at nothing, occasionally humming songs no one recognized. There were no visitors listed after Thomas's. No one had come for her. No one had asked questions. She'd been erased. Diane closed the file and pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to breathe. Mavis Ann Brown had died at birth in 1935, but Thomas Palmer had used her name to bury his stepdaughter alive. Had twisted Estelle's grief, her lifelong conversation with the sister she'd lost, into evidence of insanity. Had her lobotomized, locked away, and forgotten. And he'd done it to protect his investment, to keep Melancholy Belle profitable, to preserve the illusion of Stella Mae. Diane wanted to scream, wanted to tear the file apart, storm out of the facility, call reporters, lawyers, anyone who would listen. But then she stopped. What's the point? Thomas Palmer was dead, had been for almost 30 years. Liza was dead. Dr. Gannon was dead. The studio executives, the doctors, everyone who'd enabled this, all gone. There was no one left to hold accountable, no justice to be had. And Stella, whoever she'd been, was 90 years old, non-verbal, her mind fractured beyond repair. Exposing the truth wouldn't give her back her life, wouldn't undo the lobotomy, wouldn't bring back Hank or the baby, or the girl who'd sung in her father's voice. It would only destroy the one thing she had left, her legacy. Melancholy Belle was still beloved. Stella Mae was still remembered as a star, a talent, a bright light extinguished too soon. If Diane told the truth, that would be gone too. Stella would become a victim, a cautionary tale, a tragedy dissected in tabloids and documentaries. Diane couldn't do that to her. So she closed the file and walked out of the records room with the truth locked inside her chest. But she didn't stop visiting. Every Thursday, Diane came to Pine Haven. She played piano for the residents, but she always ended up in room 347, where the old woman with white hair sat by the window. Diane started bringing things. Photos first. She'd gone to the archives at Crestwood Studios, sweet-talked her way in, and dug through boxes of production stills from Melancholy Belle. Found pictures of the cast and crew, and there, grainy, half hidden in the background, was Hank Miller. Lean, quiet, working on a set piece, his face turned slightly toward the camera. Diane printed the photo, brought it to Pine Haven, and sat beside Mavis, beside Estelle. "I found him," Diane said softly, holding the photo where the old woman could see. "Hank, Henry Miller. He was real, and he loved you." The woman's eyes didn't focus, but her fingers moved, slow and trembling toward the image. Diane placed it in her hands. "He didn't leave you," Diane whispered. "Thomas made him disappear, but he loved you. I know he did." The woman's lips moved, soundless. Her fingers traced the photo over and over. Diane came back the next week, and the next. She played Melancholy Belle on a portable speaker, soft and low. She talked to Estelle like she could hear, like she understood. "You were so brave," Diane said one afternoon, her voice thick. "You survived so much, and I'm sorry no one saved you." Winter came. Estelle grew frailer. The nurses said it was her time. 90 years was a long life after all. Her body was shutting down, piece by piece. Diane visited every day now, sat beside her, held her hand, played music on her phone. The old woman didn't eat much anymore, didn't move, but sometimes her fingers would tighten around Diane's just slightly. One evening in late December, Diane sat by her bedside, the room dim and quiet. Estelle's breathing was shallow, labored. Diane leaned close. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can go. You don't have to stay anymore." For a long time there was only the sound of breathing. And then, so faint Diane almost missed it. A voice. "Hank." Diane's breath caught. Estelle's eyes were open, staring at something Diane couldn't see. Her lips moved, forming words that took everything she had left. "Mavis, I'm ready." A tear slipped down her cheek, and then she was gone. Diane sat there for a long time, holding the hand of a woman the world had forgotten. When the nurses came, Diane stepped back, her face wet with tears. "Her name," Diane said quietly, "was Estelle May Brown." The nurse looked at her, confused. "The chart says." "I know what the chart says. But her name was Estelle." They buried her in a small cemetery outside the city. No family, no mourners, just Diane, standing alone by the grave, marked Mavis Ann Brown. Diane placed a single photo on the casket before they lowered it into the ground. Hank Miller, grainy and half-turned, working on a movie set. "Go find them," Diane whispered. "Hank, your beautiful baby, and Mavis." She turned and walked away, the truth buried with the woman who'd lived 2 lives and died with neither.